Just for the people who will be listening to this or watching this who haven't seen the documentaries or don't know much about these, the trade in either bushmeat or in the case of tigers for parts, could you just give an idea of what is going on in these areas?
I mean, obviously, bushmeat is an issue which we can reasonably understand, meaning people have always hunted and lived off wild animal protein, certainly in Africa. What has changed in the last 30, 40 years, which I have illustrated or tried to illustrate, is mostly how it has been commercialized. Before it was subsistence hunting by hunters living in the forest. And nowadays, pretty much all these forests have been opened up with logging roads by a lot of European logging companies to start off with. Now, many have been sold to Chinese and to Asian outfits. But anyway, once the forests are opened up, once the lorries start rolling, the subsistence hunter can certainly sell stuff into the market by selling it to the driver, who hides it on his truck and transports it to the next urban center and makes additional money, which flows, of course, back to the hunter. So they no longer just hunt for what they need, they now hunt for the market. And in that context, it got totally out of control in some of the areas like Cameroon, where logging was intensive, or even Congo. And so that's what I tried to document, how it had changed. And basically, that's one of the realities which I guess is generally accepted now is an issue. Tigers, yes, I mean, again, I had heard about, it was an accidental getting into the tiger documentary by being offered 2 tiger cubs, or being told that 2 tiger cubs were for sale, trying to follow up on that and getting much deeper into it all, who might have bought them, and the tiger farms who were trying to do this commercially. And then getting into real details as far as, for example, seeing jewelry, tiger bone jewelry, which was advertised as being the top end of the market product, which was pinkish in color. Then trying to figure out how is it different from the whitish, yellowish, white color jewelry items, necklaces, bangles, and so on, being told by a dealer on camera, yes, because the tiger is deboned while it's still alive. I mean, it's sedated and then it's deboned, so the blood is still in circulation. I don't know if that's actually true scientifically or not, but it's certainly a good story, and buyers would pay extra money for the pink bones over the normal bones on the basis that the tiger had been deboned while it was still alive. So there was more power to it somehow. So anyway, looking into all this, as I said, it was challenging, interesting, sometimes shocking, disturbing, but I felt I wanted to get the story out there, and individual viewers like yourself being able to form their own opinion where they stood in all this.
And you personally, I mean, I think you live with some non-human animals as essentially family members, I suppose. So I imagine that your compassion when you lie in bed at night afterwards for the creatures that you film must be intense. And could you give us a sense of your sort of relationships, your feelings for non-human animals? Because it's not as if you're someone who's sort of like filming it without a kind of an intense personal involvement on your own part.
Is that in many scenarios, you film and so on, and there's no, I mean, even when it comes to mahout and people riding on elephant, it's wrong, but you cannot actually see the actual suffering there. The elephant seems to be reasonably okay. He gets fed, he gets medical treatment, veterinary treatment if necessary, and he has to trudge around with tourists for 2-3 hours a day. So I document that as an abuse, in a sense, of these animals shouldn't be living under these conditions for the rest of their life. But if you have scenarios like Burma, which had 5,000 logging elephants, and then the logging had to stop because there were no longer any trees. So what happens to these 5,000 elephants? They used to earn their keep. Now they can't earn their keep anymore. So if there's no tourism or so, then what's their future? Probably none. So you had to look sometimes at both sides. But then every now and then, you see scenarios where there's clear suffering and clear cruelty involved. And that then, gets me to a point where I do feel I almost want to physically intervene, which you generally can't do in those settings. But it gets pretty disturbing. I mean, in this latest film, we're going to use footage which I didn't shoot myself, but commissioned of a mother being separated from her calf for the training side of it. The training is pretty rough to break in a young elephant, and to separate a mother and the calf is extremely distressing. Till I saw this footage, I didn't realize how distressing that actually was, and that's, that blows your mind on what goes on that level. I mean, the mother's, pulling on her chains, lying on the ground, and the calf screaming, and it's just mayhem. And these guys are hammering away at the calf with hooks, and the elephant is bleeding and so on. When you see all that, but that's necessary to get them to the point where they perform in tourist settings. So pretty much every elephant which you see in those settings has gone through that at some stage in his life, at a relatively early stage in the life, when they're about 3-4 years old. So yeah, there can be distressing components to it all.
When I was studying English literature at university, I became very interested in the sort of impact of witnessing something. And it seems it was something that a lot of Renaissance playwrights and maybe even Greek tragedians were interested in, were exploring. I remember in one play by John Ford, there's a character who knows about something bad, and it's as if she's kind of punished just for the knowledge that she has. And of course, there's the scene in King Lear where Gloucester has his eyes put out. And you feel when you're witnessing that thing, there's something sort of like very visceral about witnessing, and it's almost as if you kind of want to be blinded in those moments. It's as though we fear we risk being contaminated by seeing evil, in a sense, and so a lot of us, we avoid it. I mean, I know an awful lot of people, and I've not wanted to watch a lot of things because I couldn't bear to watch it, or I didn't want those ideas going around in my head. How do you withstand that very human desire not to be contaminated by seeing what you see?
I mean, there's one aspect is curiosity to find out why is it happening, what motivates the person behind it. And there's one example which I keep always talking about. It was in a small town in Vietnam, and there was all this screaming from a pig, which I knew was a pig, walked around the corner of the building, and there they were slaughtering the pig. Now, obviously, we all know that pigs go, I mean, when they scream and are being killed, you can imagine there's a lot of screaming and stuff going on. So that was obvious. But what shook me more than that was there were children playing soccer right next to it. And this seemed to be the father who was killing this pig for an upcoming festival. And I said to myself, hey, I grew up in Switzerland. If I had heard this, or if I'd seen it, I would have gone up and said, Dad, what the hell are you doing? What's going on here? Is this necessary? I mean, I would have asked that at a very early age, I'm convinced. And I could see these Vietnamese kids couldn't give a damn about what was happening, showed no interest at all. And I started wondering, are we different in some ways? I can't believe that they didn't live in a slaughterhouse, so they didn't experience this daily. This was for a festival which was upcoming, so it was very irregular that they would witness this. And still, there was hardly a reaction to what was going on in front of them. So yeah, and the other aspect is that I keep saying, look, this disturbs me. if I document it, if I show it to other people, I hope it disturbs them. If I can take the excuse away from policymakers, from decision makers, that I didn't know, because now they know. They can't say I didn't know, because that goes, on a lot of times. I remember your prime minister. He saw Rishi Sunak. He talked in Parliament about this was before he became prime minister, about having seen a film on tiger farming somewhere, and that the UK Parliament should do something about stopping it. This was totally out of the blue, it seemed. But I then wrote him and I said, yes, there's a hell of a lot of this going on, and we had some communication on this. So, the feeling is, if the British Prime Minister knows about it, discusses it in Parliament, it creates a hell of a lot of awareness about people who potentially have the way to influence policy making down the line.